says recording now.
Yes.
Craig.
Okay, great.
All right, Mike, you want to get started?
Sounds good. Okay, the planning board of Berkeley Heights shall come to order. This meeting is being held electronically via the Zoom virtual meeting service and will be conducted in conformance with the Open Public Meeting Act. Adequate notice of this meeting has been posted on the township website and sent to the newspaper of record. The agenda for the meeting, as well as instructions for public participation in the meeting, have also been posted on the township website and sent to the newspaper of record. The agenda items will not necessarily be heard in the order listed, and the meeting will not continue substantially past 10:30 p.m. Okay, who's in charge of calling the roll?
I'll call the roll, Mr. Einbinder. Mr. Einbinder?
Here?
Mr. Einbinder? Can you hear me?
Yes,
Hello?
we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we
Okay.
got you.
Mr. Einbinder?
Here.
Present. Mr. Johnson?
Here.
Mr. Johnson?
Here.
Mr. Graziano? Mr. Nishepro? Mr. Hall?
Here.
Ms. Schwartz? Ms. Schwartz? Mr. Mangold? Ms. Pogue?
Here.
Ms. Greenwald?
Here.
Ms. Green? Mr. Cunningham?
I'm here.
Mr. Monaco? Mr. Robertson?
Here,
Mr. Hughes?
Here.
Mr. Solfero? Okay.
The first item is the adoption of the minutes for the April 1, 2020 regular meeting. Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, at this point, I'm going to turn this over to Bill Robertson regarding the presentation of the master plan reexamination report.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. The first item on the agenda is the presentation of a master plan reexamination report. That is a report that's been prepared by Mr. Hughes, the board and the township planner. And Mr. Hughes will be sworn in and present the report, the reexamination report, which includes certain recommendations with regard to property, portion of the Connell corporate property. Mr. Hughes is here. He'll testify regarding his report. The procedure will be that after he's completed that, any member of the board may ask any questions that they wish regarding the recommendations. And if any member of the public wishes to question or ask questions of Mr. Hughes regarding the report, they're free to do so. They'll have to do that in an orderly sequence. They'll be called upon and ask those questions or make any comments. At the conclusion of that, the board will vote on a resolution as to whether or not to adopt the reexamination report and the recommendations contained therein. And there was a draft resolution that has been, I believe, distributed to all of the members of the board. And if the resolution is acceptable as drafted, it can be voted on in that fashion. If there are any changes or amendments, that certainly can be added in as well. So having said that, if there are no other questions regarding the presentation, I think the first thing to do would be to swear in Mr. Hughes and ask him to present his report. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, do you want to swear in Mr. Hughes?
Sure. Mr. Hughes, do you swear that your statements before the planning board will be truthful?
Yes, I do.
And Keenan, can you
Okay, you're good to go.
Describe for the board?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks, Bill, for that introduction. So I'm going to present to the planning board the master plan reexamination report prepared by my office in April of this year. I know it's been posted on the website. It's been circulated to the board well in advance of the meeting. This document, as a reexamination report, it becomes part of the master plan. And the idea here is this is the planning board providing direction to really to council with respect to land use policy as it relates, in this case, to the Connell Park property. So this report focuses very specifically on Connell Corporate Park, and it recommends a potential rezoning of a portion of the existing park. And specifically, it relates to block 4102, lot 1, block 4301, lots 1.011, 1.012, and 1.02, and also block 4501, lots 25 and 26. A reexamination report by statute has to address 5 different criteria, and that's how we structured this report. So I'm just going to walk the board through our analysis of each of those elements. And the first is to address the major problems and objectives relating to land development in the municipality at the time of the adoption of the last reexamination report. In this case, that was in 2017. What we've done, and this is on page 1, is to enumerate the objectives that were set forth in that 2017 reexamination report. Those come straight from the master plan land use element. I'm not going to read them into the record here, but they're enumerated on page 1. But the real relevance here is that the 2017 master plan reexamination report, while it didn't recommend any changes to those objectives I just referenced, it really focused also on the Connell Park property, and in particular recommended a rezoning of a 12-acre portion of the site for what became the ORA1 zone. And that was intended to accommodate a mix of multifamily residential development, which included affordable housing, some retail and related ancillary uses. And it still retained the existing ORA zone for the majority of Connell Corporate Park. So those were recommendations that were made in the 2017 master plan reexamination report, which is a document of the planning board. So criteria B is to address the extent to which such problems and objectives have been reduced or have increased subsequent to such date. So what's happened since 2017? In that regard, the Township Council did take up the recommendations of the 2017 reexamination report. It implemented an amendment to the zoning ordinance to create that ORA1 zone. So as shown in figure 2 in my report, the Connell Corporate Park property as it exists today is currently split into 3 separate zone districts: the ORA, the ORA1, and the ORB. And since 2017, the Connell Company has further refined its plans. It's brought on engineers and architects to really dig in and lay out and design what it would like to do on the property in terms of its mixed-use destination. It's a concept that includes work, residential, hospitality, retail, entertainment, and recreation opportunities. Some of you may be aware that they have presented concepts to Township Council. I know last year there was a presentation, and I think maybe even prior to that, there have been other presentations to Council at various points. So at this point, the Township is familiar with what Connell intends to do on its property. And I should also note that the revised plans also incorporate 5 acres of open space, which are inclusive of a dog park, a recreational field, and some other amenities. And then there's also various retail and entertainment establishments that would be integrated into the existing office, hotel, and other uses on site. But as these plans have developed, I want to make clear that the residential component, which again This was an inclusionary multifamily development that was part of the township's affordable housing settlement. That has not changed at all. It remains 328 units, of which 45 of those would be affordable. So that's part of the existing zoning, and it's something that the township would be looking to retain moving forward. So then C is addressing the extent to which there have been significant changes in the assumptions, policies, and objectives forming the basis for the master plan or development regulations as last revised, with particular regard to the density and distribution of population and land uses, housing conditions, circulation, conservation of natural resources, energy conservation, collection, disposition, and recycling of designated recyclable materials, and changes in state, county, and municipal policies and objectives. So as we sit here in 2020, looking back on the rezoning that was completed in 2017, what has become clear is that the current zoning framework, which divides the property into 3 separate zoning districts, is simply not sufficient to allow for the creation of an integrated open space system and interconnected mixed-use center. Because the ORA1 zone was delineated to be limited to just a 12-acre portion of the property, it became quite difficult and not viable as Con-El began to lay out the actual project to actually confine it to that 12-acre area. And moreover, just in terms of from a planning perspective, this is a property that makes sense to address from more of a comprehensive standpoint, and to look at a zoning treatment for the site that applies to the entire property rather than carving it up into segments. And I also want to point out that certainly in terms of the overall real estate market landscape, the suburban office market continues to undergo a drastic shift away from isolated single user corporate office facilities, old-fashioned suburban corporate parks, and really all over developers are looking, successful communities are looking to amend their existing zoning ordinances and to encourage and promote a more diverse mix of uses in these centers to create more walkable communities that are desirable by today and tomorrow's workforce. So that's sort of the overarching theme from a planning perspective with respect to these policy recommendations. And then criteria D, or element D, is the specific changes recommended for the master plan or development regulations, if any, including underlying objectives, policies, and standards, or whether a new plan or regulation should be prepared. So what this reexamination report recommends is a new mixed-use zone that would comprise the majority of the site. So specifically, it would include essentially everything but the existing L'Oreal and Lifetime fitness uses. So it leaves out lots 25 and 26 within block 4501, but the balance of Connell Park would be included in this recommended new mixed-use zone. And that's illustrated in figure 3 in the report. The recommended land uses for the MU zone, it's essentially a carryover of what's currently permitted in the ORA, the ORA1, and the ORB zones. So it includes offices, research and development facilities, multifamily residential, retail, fitness centers, recreational facilities, entertainment venues, hotels, dog parks, parks and playgrounds, municipal buildings and other governmental uses, places of worship, including parish homes and religious school buildings, and schools or other educational institutions. So again, this land use concept here is really intended to create the kind of mixed use, live, work, play, stay destination that the owners want to create, and from a community standpoint is probably the best way to go in terms of ensuring the viability of this property, which is a critically important piece of property in terms of the overall tax base of the community into the future. We want to encourage a sustainable development of this site that moves away from a focus on corporate office, given the difficulties facing that sector of the real estate market in the suburban realm, at least, and really encourage this type of walkable mixed-use community. So aside from the land uses, the reexamination report also recommends some guidance with respect to various bulk and parking requirements that could be implemented as part of a zoning ordinance. So on the residential component, as I mentioned earlier, the recommendation is to basically not change what currently exists, which is stay consistent with the existing affordable housing settlement, permit up to 328 units on the site, inclusive of the affordable housing component that's already planned for and part of the settlement, 45 units. With respect to retail, there is the reexamination report recommends and supports the notion of including more retail and entertainment venue uses within the property. But it also recommends that there should be some maximum square footage or an overall cap on the amount of retail within the property. And a certain portion of the overall retail cap should be reserved for entertainment-focused retail uses, such as bowling alleys and movie theaters, uses which the owner has indicated it has received interest and is actively trying to recruit to the site. And at least from our perspective, we believe that would be a nice complement in terms of creating the type of destination that we think fits well for the property. Also, certain existing and future retail spaces within the existing office and research development buildings on site could be made available to the general public where appropriate. There are certain amenity spaces within the buildings that currently exist or could exist in the future that would actually serve quite well as public amenities as well. Cafes, other small food and beverage type uses. So that would be encouraged as part of the zoning. But we don't want this to become a power center type big box destination. I mean, this is not intended to be a shopping mall. It's not going to be a big box retail center. So the reexamination report recommends placing a prohibition on big box retail stores as part of any ordinance. And then as for open space, the report recommends a minimum of 5 acres of open space within the mixed use zone. And those open spaces would be publicly accessible, and they would include walking trails, parks, dog parks, plazas for public gathering places, playgrounds, sports courts, fitness areas, things of that nature. And it's also recommended that that open space component should be provided and constructed as part of any initial phase of development within the property pursuant to the zoning ordinance. I do want to note that under the current zoning, the property could accommodate over 3 million square feet of gross floor area. What this reexamination report recommends is that any zoning ordinance should place a cap on the overall intensity of development at 2.25 million square feet, which is actually a reduction from what's currently allowed under the existing zoning. Again, just to control the overall intensity of development, control traffic that's generated, other impacts stemming from this property. And then as for bulk requirements, just conceptually, it makes sense to basically implement those bulk requirements based on the overall tract rather than segmenting the property into different sub areas, but really to try to look at the property as a whole in terms of coverage, setbacks, things of that nature. Again, along the lines of encouraging a comprehensive approach to the overall property. And for the most part, the building height, impervious coverage, and other limitations should really reflect the existing zoning of the site. And then finally, with respect to parking, in light of the mixed use concept here, we are recommending a shared parking approach that the ordinance allow for shared parking, which means balancing the parking demand that would come from various users on the property. So office users would be, their maximum demand for parking would be at a different time than, let's say, restaurant patrons, which might be coming later in the evening. So allowing for the most efficient use of parking resources on the property. And then we've also recommended for office, 1 per 400 square feet of gross floor area, and other non-residential uses having a requirement of 1 per 300 square feet of gross floor area, and also recommending a relaxation of multifamily residential requirements from the RSI standards, particularly in light of the walkable mixed-use nature of the property. The fifth and final element is just to address whether or not any of this needs to be, to the extent this is a redevelopment, statutory redevelopment initiative, whether that needs to be wrapped into the master plan. This is not a redevelopment matter, so element E is essentially irrelevant, but we did cite it as part of our reexamination report. So with that, that's an overview of the reexamination report, which, just to recap, is really intended to be a policy document for the governing body's consideration in its drafting of an ordinance to implement this mixed-use concept for the Connell Park property. So it's not an ordinance in itself, of course, but it's really to just lay the policy foundation for an ordinance that might follow. So that concludes my direct presentation. Happy to take any questions.
Kevin here, I have a few questions for you. When you make reference to a prohibition on big box stores, is there a definition of what a big box store is, and would that be explicit in the ordinance?
Yeah, there's different ways to address this issue. There's a lot of different definitions out there, but what we would look at likely doing is placing a limitation on the footprint of a store. So you often see 40,000 square feet, 50,000 square feet, 60,000 square feet. Those are typical limitations that try to prevent or prohibit large format retail users on the site.
Do you have a current recommendation as to what a maximum would be?
We did in the draft ordinance that we prepared and was discussed by council in April. We have a limitation of 50,000 square feet. And I also want to note that the Connell Park owners do have some desire to attract a grocer to the property. And so they're looking at a user that might be less than 50,000 square feet, but certainly more than 20,000 square feet. So we want to provide an opportunity for that type of use. I think it works well on the site, but preventing something like a Home Depot or a Walmart from coming into Connell Park.
Okay, because once you grant that footprint, you cannot control the nature of the company that's going to do that, right? So that could prove to be a whole range of different corporate applicants, not necessarily a grocery store, correct?
Yeah, less than 50,000 square feet, as long as they meet the retail definitions in the ordinance, they would be permitted. That's correct.
When there was an application for the CVS, I remember there was I won't say it was contentious, but it was rather involved. The conversation about adequate parking downtown in the traffic study on the May property in the aggregate. And you had mentioned the shared use approach to that. How do you see that playing out with respect to the various applications that come down the pike over time, and how you measure adequacy with regards to parking in that shared environment? Because I'm presuming that each of these buildings over time would come to the planning board for review, and each one would sort of set a standard and a reference point for examining capacity for aggregate parking on a shared basis. So how does the planning board logically approach that? And when is like the number too much, so to speak? Because we could find ourselves sort of back into a corner where we have to start to give relief in the later stages of development because of pre-existing approvals.
Well, the nice thing about shared parking is it really allows for that kind of ongoing adaptive management of the situation. So they would be, unlike a typical application where there's just, here's our parking requirement, here's the number of spaces we have, we're either compliant or we're not, would you please grant us a variance? This actually looks at comprehensively all of the uses on site So for each application that comes in, there would be a shared parking analysis that would be updated over time based on the different users within the property and based on actual parking counts that people are observing, different peaks for different users. So there'd be opportunities anytime the applicant is in for site plan approval. And I anticipate, as you point out, there will be multiple, just given the size of the property. That parking is something that the planning board will be allowed to sort of manage on an ongoing basis. It's not going to be a one-off situation.
Great, thank you.
Hi, Keenan. Susan here.
Hi there.
Am I muted? Oh, I'm muted. Hold on. No,
You're good.
I'm muted again. Sorry. You think I'd be used to the Zooming by now, right? So I have a couple questions, but first I want to applaud you because like the vision of thinking about this as a comprehensive piece instead of a piecemeal approach, which is really positive, I think, and a good vision for Berkeley Heights. There's a couple things I want to make sure of. So a couple residents were concerned about a second helipad going on. I think that might be a rumor, correct?
Yeah, so that may not even be mentioned in the reexamination report, but in the draft ordinance that was discussed by council in April, one of the accessory uses that would be permitted would be a helipad. And that's just because one exists today. And so, from a zoning standpoint, it makes sense to permit it. But what we can do is basically just limit it to one and say, one exists today. That's all there's ever going to be. There's no notion of adding an additional heliport to the property. So I'm sure the owners would be comfortable with that.
All right, perfect. My second question is about the educational institution. So for me, when I envision an educational institution, it's a brick building that houses many classrooms and things like that. Is there a way to kind of define what that would look like on this property? Because what I'm thinking is it might be like a karate school, or it could be, a drama classes as educational, but they're not talking about like a school, correct?
Yeah, I mean, that's a fairly broad category as drafted. I mean, you're right. I wouldn't envision, a university satellite campus on the property, or a charter school for that matter, but something like an SAT prep center, or a small sort of educational training tenant. I mean, that would be terrific for the property. We could take a look at refining that definition. It is something that's carried over from the existing ordinance. So it's been permitted in this form on the property for many, many years. But to your point, the council could certainly look at refining that a little bit more to prevent, if there's a concern about a large scale educational institution on the property, we could probably find a way to address that.
Perfect. And if I could just do my third thing before I give up the floor, would that be okay? My third question?
Of
Yes.
course.
Okay.
Well, sure.
So perfect. I don't want to hog the floor. I just want to make sure that's okay. So I attended about 2 weeks ago a Zoom meeting with the residents of Twin Falls Road, and I think anyone that lives in Berkeley Heights knows that Twin Falls runs from Diamond Hill to Valley Road. It's a downhill trip from Diamond Hill to the Valley Road side, and it's a problem because it's for the residents there, because it is a cut through, and a lot of people try to avoid the traffic at the Diamond Hill and Valley Road intersection by cutting through Twin Falls Road. So residents are really, really concerned that with more construction, that's going to just really impact it more greatly than it has been in the past. I mean, Lifetime, it's not 24/7, but it's open 7 days a week for many, many hours. And with more, maybe restaurants and other kinds of amenities that people want to go to, that's going to empower it or make it even a worse situation. So some of the things that the engineer came up with were three choices, really. Cleaning up the foliage and putting in a don't block the box and things like that. The second thing was a speed bump, which a lot of the residents I heard at the meeting were not happy with, because in the area they wanted to put it in, there was a lot of icing and it could cause a dangerous situation. And the third thing that residents seemed to be really happy about would be to close off one end or the other and have an exit out only where you couldn't come in. So I was hoping that that was something that we could talk about, only because this road was not on that traffic study.
Yeah, so with respect to traffic, I mean, what I would say is, the big picture here is just that this rezoning would actually reduce the total square footage of development. So believe it or not, even though there's this anticipated development that would follow from this ordinance, it's actually less than what would be allowed under the current ordinance. So when traffic engineers look at this, they say, well, the generation is actually going to be reduced. Having said that, there are existing conditions and other potential conditions that could be triggered. We are looking at certain off-track situations, including Twin Falls Road. I know the township engineer, as you pointed out, has some recommendations there. So I anticipate that either as part of site plan approval, which would be obviously before the planning board, or it could be as part of a developer's agreement between council and the applicant. Some of these off-track conditions will have to be addressed as part of the rezoning. And I think the township engineer has some great ideas for Twin Falls Road, and that was a productive meeting. But it's a little outside the scope of the re-exam at this point. But certainly, as we move forward with the ordinance, and if there's ultimately site plan approvals that come before the planning board, that will be the time to implement those improvements.
Okay, thank you.
And just a quick follow-up question to that. You'd mentioned that a lower footprint would suggest a lower traffic, and that's really a function of use, right? So can one make the position statement that if you lower the aggregate footprint on the property, it'll actually lends itself to lower traffic load? Is that an accurate presumption? Unless you actually know what the usage is of the buildings?
It depends on the uses, but what the traffic study has done, and a traffic study was submitted to the township as part of this, and the township engineer reviewed it. It basically projected what exists on the property now, what could be developed under existing zoning, which is predominantly office space, what the generation would be in terms of trips, versus with the rezoning where there's this mix of retail, and it projected the various mix of uses that's anticipated for the site, ran that analysis, and it was actually less generation overall.
Okay. Very good.
Keenan, this is Craig.
Can I just piggyback? You guys know how I love to piggyback. I'm sorry. But my thought is, if there's more like amenities and fun things for people to do, couldn't that maybe generate more traffic throughout the day? Because if you have just housing, maybe people go to work, they're gone all day, then they come home. But in a place where there's a lot of action during a whole day, couldn't there be more traffic? Because I think it's an inference. We're making an inference, really.
Well, I think it's fair to say with a mix of uses you're going to have, it's not just going to be a traditional office park where you have everyone comes in the morning and everyone leaves in the afternoon. You're going to have a more balanced distribution of trips throughout the day. Whether the actual peak hour is how that compares to the existing condition of the office. I mean, that's what they looked at in the traffic study. I'm obviously not a traffic engineer, so I don't want to wade too far into the details, but just conceptually, I think if you look at the way this property could develop in the future, there's going to be a more balanced distribution of trips, but there will also be times like on the weekends where you're going to have traffic that doesn't exist today. So that's, another factor that's taken into consideration.
Okay,
Susan, this is Larry.
Hi, Larry.
Two things, I guess, is if you go ever look at that, the traffic that goes around the intersection of Valley and Diamond Hill, right? When I go down in the morning, sometimes it's backed up from Valley Road all the way up to Route 78. And more importantly, for the cars that are coming to probably Bell Labs in the old days now, Nokia, it's backed up all the way to 22. So you're talking about almost about a 4-mile stretch that's bumper to bumper in the critical peak hour zone. So if you can soften that any way whatsoever by different uses, whatever, then you're going to overall, your traffic should go down, and the incentive, if you want to call it that, to do the cut through would be less. So it's key if there's some way to avoid or reduce that peak hour flow right now. It's a killer right now, Monday through Friday, or it was before the pandemic.
Now it's easy, yeah.
Yeah.
Keenan, this is Craig Johnson. I got two questions. One, going back to the discussion that you had with Kevin, regarding the 50,000 square foot of, was it grocery or market? I'm not sure what the
Just
term was.
just general retail, just a prohibition on all retail over 50,000 square feet
Okay.
gross
What-
floor area.
What would you compare 50,000 square foot to in Berkeley Heights today that we could relate to?
I mean, that's a large anchor store, so I don't know the exact square footage of like the old Kings or, that would be like a larger grocer, essentially.
So more on the line of Stop and Shop or something like that.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. My next question, and I know probably at 7:15, I saw an email from Liza about the traffic report, and which she was hoping to distribute to the planning board. Is everything in the report basically is what you already covered regarding the 3 recommendations, or is there more?
I think that's essentially what Councilwoman Poj was referring to. That's the report from the township engineer that emerged from the meeting that we had with Twin Falls Road residents. So he sets forth some recommendations in there. I mean, those are issues, getting into the details, which, as I stated, would be implemented later on if council goes forward through rezoning, if there's site plan approval, if there's developers agreement. Those are improvements that could be implemented as part of that.
A question for you. Can I assume that this rezoning request was presented by Connell?
Yes.
Okay, I mean, have they presented any parking traffic or studies which would complement or compete or provide additional insight other than what's been provided by the town engineer?
They have, and actually it's probably still available on the township website, but in advance of an April council meeting, I put together a package which included a draft ordinance, and it also included a fiscal impact analysis that was submitted by Connell. It included a traffic study submitted by Connell, which is prepared by Langen Engineering. And it also included a brief report from the township's affordable housing attorney with respect to affordable housing impacts that could come from a rezoning.
To your knowledge, did that speak to anything that Larry had brought up before about just the traffic conditions up and down Diamond Hill during peak, both north and south? Was that addressed or discussed or mentioned?
Yeah, and I don't know the details again. I mean, I believe that intersection was studied, but the bottom line is that the overall conclusion is just that this results in a gross reduction in the total trip generation or traffic that would be generated by this property, existing zoning versus proposed zoning. So I think along the lines of what Larry was suggesting, this rezoning would actually result in a more balanced distribution of traffic flow and avoid that potential future scenario where you have over 3 million square feet of office, which is really all peaking at the same time.
Thank you.
Keenan,
Yes. Hi, Robin.
it's Robin. I have 1 or 2 questions about the uses.
Okay.
When you envisioned offices, did you include medical in that or not really? A doctor's office or a dentist's office or something like that?
Yes, and I'm just I need to double check the definitions, but it is a broad definition of office that would provide some flexibility for different office users, potentially including office.
And then I was also thinking about personal service businesses.
And personal service would be included with retail.
Well, I'm kind of looking for the zoning officer in the future that if we need to include it, we should say it.
Yeah, and I'm just looking at the draft ordinance, Robin, and actually under retail, And actually in the reexamination report as well, it says as defined in section 2.1.1.
Yeah, I did
Go to
see
that.
that, but I
If
don't
you
have
go to that
section.
definition, it captures the personal service aspect. So that's why we did that.
Okay, and what about a daycare center someplace? And or doggy daycare?
Yeah, childcare centers, I mean, they may be permitted as of right, just under the municipal land use law. It's a good question. I'll take a look at that.
Okay, I was
As
just,
well as dog day.
you know, if we're going for this whole live, work, play, someone who may live there and work there might want to find a place for their child to go before or after school or whatever, you know.
Understood.
Mike, any other questions from the planning board?
I have one last question. The intent tonight is this an information sharing process, or are we voting on something here?
No, there would be a motion and a resolution to adopt the reexamination report, and a draft of that resolution was circulated. So there actually would be a motion to adopt the reexamination report as submitted.
And I just want to add in terms of the process that this is the master plan document. To the extent council pursues an ordinance, obviously it would be referred to planning board for review, at which point you'd have an opportunity to review it for consistency with the master plan, but also provide any recommendations in that regard that you'd like to send back to council. So you'll have an additional opportunity to review and comment on any ordinance.
But then eventually the Connells will have to actually present an application and specific plans. Just because we're approving a reexamination of the master plan for this doesn't mean we're totally approving a project.
Right.
That's right.
Specific things will have to come.
Correct. I mean, this is really, as I stated, it's really just like sort of the policy roadmap for council.
No, I get that. I just,
site plan comes back to planning board, no doubt.
Yeah, I just for the record, I mean, I agree with to what Robin's saying. I think it is a very high level concept. It makes sense. This has gaping holes in it with regards to specifics in terms of the nature and the range of services that are provided. Just the size of that 50,000 square feet and the different occupants that may be there from time to time, and the impact on traffic and parking, and how we would sort of manage the different applications as this process continued. Because as you hard code the applicants which are using this building, it changes the suitability of the residual availability, right? So just as long as we're keenly aware of that, I just wanted to throw that out there for the record.
Can I just make one comment? Because we already approved building, like they can still build what they were going to build, if the rezoning doesn't happen.
Well, I mean, there is existing zoning. We didn't approve any building per se. There's zoning on the property.
No, there wasn't. There a redevelopment plan was approved for them to build units, housing units, as part of our affordable housing plan commitment.
Well, is this considered a replacement of that?
Well, this would meet, I think this would, he was saying it would still be 328 units, and it would, and 45 affordable. So this would still meet our affordable housing commitment.
So yeah,
something's going to get built, whether it's what they approved last time, which was, I think, might have been 2017, or they have the new plan because they realized the corporate park is really not viable anymore. So they came up with this new plan, but something's going to get built, whether it's something that gets built that the residents don't get to share a part of, or if we rezone and the residents do get to share a part of it.
But I
That's
think
my understanding.
I think those are two very different concepts, right? I think we approved something to address the co-op obligation. Now this is a rezoning of the entire property.
But it would still meet that housing the affordable housing obligation.
Mr. Robertson, can you opine on this?
Yes, and maybe Mr. Hughes can as well. But in terms of, a component of this property is the residential with the affordable housing units, but that is only one component. And this seeks to rezone in a more comprehensive way to permit the mixed use. So that is a portion. It's not going to change. It remains, but it will rezone the site in a comprehensive way.
I mean, I just look at that as, how everyone complains that downtown is so piecemeal because this happened, then this happened, and this happened. And to me, this looks like a vision of it could look like this. And I think I mentioned this word to Keenan before, the word hub. Berkeley Heights is never going to be a Summit or a Westfield in terms of downtown because of all the piecemeal zoning. And we might end up with these different hubs. Like we have the Connell hub, we have the Springfield Avenue West hub, we have the Springfield Avenue East hub, and who knows, someday maybe the Sherman Avenue hub. And one hub isn't better than the other, just different, and they would interact with each other. And we can have a different sort of, destination town than a Westfield or a Summit. But I think this is like the first time a property has been looked at and with a vision. And in my experience, I've been here 25 years. That's just those are my thoughts.
I just want to clarify a bit how this relates to the existing zoning, which was implemented in 2017, which, as I mentioned, it basically allows this to occur within a very defined 12-acre portion of the site, which after they started laying it out, they couldn't fit this project within that 12 acres. It basically it spills over the boundaries of that slightly. So that's really the main need for the rezoning. So they could essentially do most of this under the existing zoning in some shape or form. It would be less than ideal, and it wouldn't include the open space component that would be implemented as part of this zoning. So I think that's where this becomes an opportunity for the township, is to, we have an opportunity to take a second look at what was already approved. The residential component's not changing. The retail is slightly increasing. Other than that, it's basically the same. And also include this publicly accessible open space component, which would be implemented as part of the initial phase, which is really critical. I mean, that will be delivered to the township. So in the end, there's not a whole lot that's changing this versus 2017 in terms of the development that's allowed on the site, other than the increase in retail.
And what was the increase in retail again? From 2017
they were permitted 85,000 before of new retail, and that's now, I think it's 185 in terms of new retail on the site.
And
that's really intended to capture that the entertainment venues, which I mentioned earlier.
And that's all on the 12-acre parcel?
It's just based on their concept plans, it's in that general area, just slightly over that 12-acre parcel that was previously zoned for the uses.
And isn't the other piece, well, can I go? I'm sorry. I feel like I keep interrupting. So the open space with the rezoning, the whole township will be able to access. But if it stays the way it is now, we don't do the rezoning and they do the building the way they wanted to, the town won't get the benefit of that open space. Am I right about that?
For the majority of the site now, the open space is just amenities for employees or folks staying at the hotel. And so the idea with this rezoning is like, okay, let's take a comprehensive look at the property. There's an opportunity for an open space network here and let's make it accessible to the public. Let's make it accessible to the community. These are not just accessory to the hotel on the site. These are public open spaces. That's
When they
a reality with the rezoning.
when they built the Grove, they did make a commitment that when they came to the board and they were going to build the Grove and the whole walking path system, they did say that the public, the residents, could use that area.
Okay.
So, I mean, even at that point, it was available. Maybe, I don't think a lot of people realize that it even exists, but it is available for residents to go up there.
And get married there.
Yes, and turn the fountains on. But they
But
made it.
I think
they made a
they're offering a
commitment.
lot more things though. You know, if there's a dog park, I mean, you know, I have a dog. I would love, we don't have a dog park in town. Like for me, that's a positive. I know that's selfish or whatever, but they're
Well, I don't
offering
think
other
people are
things.
gonna- I don't know that people are going to bring their dog to work and then take them at lunchtime to the dog park. So I'm sure that that's a community element that they're planning. And because otherwise, you know, it just, well, people that lived in the future buildings would use it, but they seem to want to involve the residents of the community at large, not just people there.
Well, I know they're a great partner in the community. I don't know if everybody on Zoom today knows that they're doing that challenge for the business and civic. If $25,000, if the business and civic group raise the money, they'll match it. So they are a great partner for us. I had a question about the field. You mentioned a field, Keenan, yes?
Yes.
So and if they build that and in this rezoning area, that's available to the Berkeley Heights teams?
Yeah, it's not going to be a full-size field. It will be open to the public, but it's not going to be a field where you could have high school soccer games.
But like a practice field?
Yeah, potentially.
Turf? You know?
Yeah, it'll be a turf, you know.
Just,
just
you know,
not-
in this wet community, we always want to know about turf. Thank you.
And Michael, I believe there's members of the public who want to comment, so you should ask if there's any more questions of the planning board.
Well, hearing none, I don't think there's anybody else who wants to speak on this.
Okay. So we'll open it up to the public now?
Yes, if there's somebody who's not a member of the board or the people who are, talking about this particular situation, I don't know if there's somebody like that and they want to make a comment,
All
they
right,
can do so.
we'll start with Margaret.
Good evening. Thank you very much. My name's Margaret Illis, and I live at 102 Twin Falls Road. I'd like to begin with a correction that when the planner was discussing the traffic study that it appears that the members of the planning board haven't read. The traffic study was written and it used ORA and not ORB as the basis for its measurements, at least according to the report that was presented to the Township Committee. And therefore, it really can't be used to say that the traffic will go down. And additionally, it included the total permitted construction compared to what's there. So when we consider what Con-El is going to do in the future, we need to compare it to what's there, not what could potentially be there at some point going down in the future. So I've been a homeowner on Twin Falls Road for 27 years. I'm speaking out against the proposed rezoning of most of the Con-El Corporate Park to mixed use. My reasons for this are twofold. First of all, I do not believe it's in the best interest for a thriving downtown area. And second, as a homeowner, this increased development will continue to erode my home value and the quality of my neighborhood. Berkeley Heights residents have expressed concerns for years regarding our downtown. We want a thriving and workable place to eat and shop. We want to support our local businesses and have a town we can be proud of. It appears to go against these goals to support Connell's building a new Main Street in a corporate park. I understand that the current development, because corporate parks are, on the way out, is to come up with these new mixed-use developments. But if you look at the ones that Connell has used as a model, they're all significantly larger than what they're proposing on their 12 acres or 12 plus acres. So I encourage the planning board to look at what Connell's actually proposing and what their models are for comparison before you make a vote. With the rezoning, it's proposed that they be given permission to build an additional 100 square feet of retail space. The original proposal was approved with the rezoning that included ORA1 with 85,000 square feet. And now that's more than doubled with the rezoning to ORB, or to mixed use. The master plan discusses the downtown business district. We have buildings and design standards, and this plan has been developed through years of community involvement and planning. This new Main Street was conceived of by Connell and presented to the township essentially as a done deal. Now they're asking for even more. We are proposing modifying the master plan at the specific request of a landowner instead of looking at the needs of the municipality. As a homeowner south of Mountain Avenue, we bear the brunt of these developments. Our quality of life and home values decrease with every new project. Most days before the pandemic, the traffic on Diamond Hill and Valley made it difficult to leave our houses or get home at the end of the day. This doesn't just impact Twin Falls, it's also the residents of McMain, Tip Top, Ridge, Glenside, Elaney, Spring Home, Southview, and Diamond Hill roads. Additionally, developments are coming to Scotch Plains and Watchung, which we have no control over, but should be considered before any rezoning of Connell is permitted. It's been mentioned that Lucent, former Bell Labs, is also looking at putting in a development similar to this. So what's that going to do to our neighborhoods as well? Decisions like this can't be made in isolation. Additionally, I question the basis of the decision that's being made. The traffic study being complete, that was completed by Connell was flawed and went unchallenged by township professionals. I have asked for backup documentation on the concept planning documents on the original proposal that resulted in the ORA and ORA1 zones, residential and retail spaces on the western end of the property, including the specifics of the retail and entertainment space. And two, concept planning documents for the proposal made to the township when Connell requested the new MU zone. These have not been available to send to me. If the township doesn't have them, then on what basis is this decision being made? If the township does have them, then why are they not available for residents to see? I asked specifically where the additional 100,000 square feet of retail space would be located, and the planner couldn't answer that question more specifically than the same area as the other retail space. Our planner in his testimony this evening said that the majority of the property is ORA, but in truth, it's ORB. I have heard repeatedly that the current zoning doesn't permit the public spaces, but Connell has clearly shown that it is possible with their building of the Grove and walking path, and Connell committed at the time that it would be open to the public, as a member of the planning board just pointed out. The planner said that if those could be built in ORB right now, then rezoning isn't necessary. The planner said that this would reduce the square footage permitted, but we all know that the square footage that the maximum square footage wouldn't have been built. This area is different than it was when that square footage was set originally. Mixed use will have many more trips, and we experience this daily with the change to Summit Medical Group from the original corporate park. So if you've ever tried to go up Diamond Hill, at most times during the day, you wind up stuck behind cars that are attempting to get into Summit Medical Group. We never had that problem when it was a corporate site. Please consider the local residents' quality of life and the entire township's desire for a vibrant downtown and do not approve this change to our master plan. I ask you to reconsider rezoning OR1 and ORA1 to a single zone MU and leave the ORB zone as it is, which is Connell 100 and 200. Or at the very least, restrict the usages to prohibit medical offices and a restriction of other uses such as educational purposes. There was no indication when I bought my house that I would eventually be living within walking distance to a mall. And when I look at the changes in the master plan over the years, there was no indication that a mall was desirable in Berkeley Heights. Malls today are not like Livingston Mall. Malls today are these outdoor strings of stores with a walking strip to get you from here to there. That's the development of malls today. And that is not in the character of Berkeley Heights. I thank you for your consideration.
Okay, we're going to go to Ally Knapp next.
I just have one just quick comment question. With all the traffic studies that have been done and the known issues of the problems we have on Twin Falls Road as a cut through, was there, number one, included in the traffic study on our street? And if not, how come it was not? Because if they did a simple traffic study included in the intersection, they would clearly see that 37 houses on Twin Falls could not generate that amount of traffic.
You want me to address that?
Yes.
Yeah, so the traffic study looked at the build out of the property under existing zoning versus what's being proposed. And it also identifies certain off-track potential improvements. And in addition, as was mentioned earlier, the township engineer is now focusing on this, and in particular, met with the residents of Twin Falls Road and has some concepts for improvements to the Diamond Hill Road and Valley Road intersection. So the traffic piece is something that's kind of happening on a separate track. The council will be in control of that. Ultimately, the planning board could be in control of that in connection with any site plan approval. So while it's somewhat pertinent to the reexamination report, its actual implementation will happen at more of a granular level in the future.
Thank you very much. That's good.
Okay, we'll now move on to Anna Burns.
Yes, hi, good evening. My name's Anna Burns, and I'm a resident here on 22 Twin Falls. And I just wanted to emphasize what the prior residents as well have addressed. And we were surprised to hear that our street was never included in the traffic study. And we're concerned what this proposal, if approved, would do to our neighborhood. So I do have a few questions I would like to ask. We understand that Connell is currently able to construct their residential housing on the western end with ORA and ORA1 zoning. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. We would like to know what would prevent Connell from doing their proposed development in ORB.
The zoning doesn't permit it.
I'm sorry?
The ORB zoning would not allow them to build anything more than office space in that zone, essentially. The zoning does not allow them to build what they want to build in the ORB.
And what is it that they want to build in ORB?
What they want to build is generally in the area of the ORA1, which is the mix of uses that I mentioned during my presentation.
So the Grove North that's currently in the plan, can it not be developed under the current zoning?
Actually, yes, much of what they want to do could be developed under the existing zoning. What the community would miss out on is the open space proposal, which would be publicly accessible and located throughout the property. Some additional retail, which could include some entertainment venues, movie theater, bowling alley, potentially a grocer. Those are elements that may not be able to be accommodated under the ORA1. But from my perspective, the big hook for the community is essentially this opportunity for 5 acres of open space, including a dog park, a recreation field, other elements, and those would not be located within the ORA1.
Right. So are you implying that the current Starbucks and Grain and Cane is not welcome to the public?
No.
So I'm trying to understand why the current zoning of ORB would prevent Connell from doing any of their proposed development for the Grove North.
Again, I don't have the ORB zoning in front of me, but it does not permit retail and entertainment uses, certainly not at the scale that they would like to accommodate within the area roughly of where the ORA1 exists today.
Okay. The only other thing that I'd just like to say is from our perspective, we do encourage the town council to reject any new changes to the zoning that was deliberated in 2017. Connell can already develop their residential and retail development in ORA and ORA1. So the existing property as well, from what we can see, is quite an open space. Thank you for your consideration and your time.
Okay, anybody else from the public want to ask a question or have a comment? All right, we're going back to Margaret.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. We've been told repeatedly, I have been told repeatedly when I ask questions at these Connell redevelopment, rezoning sessions, that Connell has no plans currently for redeveloping 100 and 200 Connell. Obviously, 200 Connell, they most likely would not, because that's their newest building, that's their newest office building. But I'm still unclear as to why Connell requires the rezoning of 100 if they have no plans to develop it. Connell has been less than upfront with residents over the past years with the other developments that they did. When they put in the exit from 78 down Oak Way, they swore up and down that there were no plans to build anything at what is now Lifetime. Once that was approved, they went ahead and did curb cuts for this new building that became Lifetime. And yet they told us that there were no plans to develop it. So I question what really are their plans for 100 and what are they going to come to us next? And if the zoning board, if the planning board grants this rezoning of the entire site, then it gives them essentially carte blanche to do what they want to, which would potentially negatively impact the residents. Thank you.
Well, I have to respond to that, because this rezoning would not give them carte blanche to do whatever it is they want to do. I mean, there would be, is recommended in this reexamination report, caps placed on overall development allowed on the property. And that would be both in terms of gross development and then based on specific use types within the property. So there simply wouldn't be endless amounts of development rights that would be allowed throughout this property based on what's recommended in the reexamination report.
Okay. I'm a 27-year resident who's been around this block a few times with Connell and the developments that they've done. So when they came to the township and requested the hotel, it was to replace office space, and they were granted the 7-story hotel because it was a similar height to the office buildings that they'd been approved in concept before, but they hadn't built all of them. Once they had the hotel, then they said, you know what, we'd like, this residential retail space, which was approved down on the western end because it was close to the hotel. So while I agree with what you're saying, there are still restrictions to the zone. Once it gets rezoned to MU, then the township doesn't have any leverage anymore, if you will. And what's to stop them from coming and saying, well, we really want to put a multi-specialty practice like Summit Medical Group there. I know it's not exactly, the plans that we talked about, but that's a really good use for the space. What's to stop that?
Well, the township controls the zoning. I mean, if they don't want that type of use, the council can prohibit it. It's as simple as that.
Okay, we will move on to AC now.
Okay. Hi, it's Amalia Canovas, 21 Twin Falls Road.
Sorry, I didn't understand your name.
Amalia Canovas.
Can you spell your last name?
Canovas, Canovas.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm resident for 26, 27 years of Twin Falls Road. Before Lifetime, in Twin Falls Road, the only problem was between 5 and 6, that, the Diamond Hill was stopped, so people, to get out of the traffic, they came into Twin Falls and crossed through there. But right now, since the Lifetime is there, it's all day, all night. Traffic is crossing through here because it doesn't make sense for them to go all the way down the hill, wait for the traffic light to turn right. It doesn't make sense for them, so they cross through here. This is happening now. Now, not because they are closing, but in normal time, this is all the time. Now, if you put like a, residential, you put restaurant, it's going to be 24/7 crossing through here, because who want to wait for a traffic light when you can just get a shortcut through Twin Falls? So what I said is I don't mind what they do there in Connell. More or less, it's it's office, it's whatever, but traffic, I think they should include like a traffic study in Twin Falls and do something about this, because it's really crazy that, I walk the dog at 11 o'clock at night and people are passing me at 60 miles an hour down the hill, going to Lifetime or coming back. So, and this is going to continue happening. So just for saying that, oh, we include the traffic study, it's not going, it doesn't affect Twin Falls, it's affecting now, and it's going to happen, with more business there, it's going to happen more and more. So I think you should, do a better study. So that's it.
Thank you. Any other members of the public want to have a comment or want to ask a question?
Hi, this is Larissa D'Amato at 95 Twin Falls Road. I just had a question on the rezoning, and I'm not familiar with the terms as much, but it sounds like L'Oreal and Lifetime are like the 100 area. So it sounds like you're not doing anything with that area. At one point we saw like a bike path in the drawing plans, and I just wanted to know, is that something that they're considering? And because that's very close to our street. So I just want to understand, is that a possibility, or is that not something that would be in that area?
So the rezoning does not include L'Oreal and Lifetime. I'm not aware of their plans in terms of a potential bikeway in that area, so I can't speak to that. But it's certainly not part of this rezoning.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, anybody else from the public? All right, Mike, back to you.
Okay, Bill, at this time, you're going to discuss the proposed resolution.
Actually, if Mr. Rumbinder, if I could ask one more question to the planner. Just to take a step back, this relates to the 2017 master plan. It's my understanding that Keenan, that you're working on a new master plan. And I'd like to know what the current status is of the master plan, which I was of the opinion that we would be looking at during 2020, and whether this examination should in fact be pointing to and viewed in the context of the new master plan as opposed to one which we are in the process of replacing anyway. So, because we're looking at this on its merits, but there's no context relative to the broader master plan, which I think in some ways trumps this. An associated question I have, is there a sense of immediacy to this that we actually have to vote on this in advance of the master plan?
Yeah, so it's an excellent question. Yes, we are working on a master plan. We were hoping to actually present a draft plan in the spring or early summer, but with the pandemic, we were asked to just kind of press pause on all master plan related activities for various reasons. It's up to the council whether they want to, pursue a rezoning of this property. So I can't speak to the urgency or the timing. We were directed to prepare a draft ordinance and to also prepare a re-examination report for the planning board that would lay the policy foundation for such a rezoning. We are pursuing this, and this master plan is considered in the context of where we were in the master plan. Certainly at the April meeting of the council, we had some discussion about how this fits into the community as a whole. This versus the downtown, is there room for both? We had that type of discussion. So it's certainly a relevant consideration. In an ideal world, yeah, would you want the comprehensive master plan perhaps adopted in advance of this type of rezoning? Yeah, sure. But you can also certainly do this procedurally by adopting a re-examination of the master plan, which looks very carefully at both the existing master plan, but also the changes that have occurred since 2017, and lay a legal and proper, and from a planning perspective, perfectly appropriate foundation for rezoning of this scale.
Can I make just a thought that just came to me? So I think a lot of people think it's this or that, where I think in Berkeley Heights, we do have room for both kinds of areas. But the one thing about this property, it's self-financed. Like a lot of our things that are going on in town now, these pilots, there's not a lot of shovels in the ground. And we are in a situation with this pandemic where this property, this project may help us come back from that kind of situation because it is self-financed and we don't have to worry about, some of the other things that are the nuances that are going on right now. So it's just a thought.
Greg? Craig, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I was thinking about this because my experience with the master plans, I've worked on them for a couple of times, but I haven't done it recently. I always thought it was just sort of it was something that people had thought about it and said, this is sort of an idea that we can consider, but that was the extent of it. And if somebody wanted to do something under that, they would, make an application, see where it went. Now, this is a little bit different, but I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with it. But I don't see any great reason that we have to get it done in any specific time unless I'm missing something. Because I know sometimes the 10 years tend to make a little bit longer.
Well, let me just say, I've sat in on a number of the master plan meetings, and the number of the things that Connell is suggesting, fall under what many of the residents in Berkeley Heights have put into their surveys. With that said, I guess I have concern over the additional, retail development proposed, and obviously the traffic on Twin Falls and the whole traffic on the Valley Road, Diamond Hill intersection is not going to get any better, with either the Connell development or if, Nokia changes their development or even just additional traffic. So it's, there's pluses or minuses to this, I would say. But, I guess the question I'd have for Mr. Robertson, if we, say yes to this, what control do we have going forward on limiting or not approving something they propose that meets these standards?
If the master plan reexamination report is adopted with the recommendations, the next step would be that the council would consider proposed ordinances that would implement the recommendations contained in the reexamination report. And if and then those ordinances would be referred back to the planning board for recommendation regarding consistency with the master plan. And presumably those ordinances would be consistent with this recommendation that's in the reexamination report. Once those ordinances are in place, then the property owner could design a project that would meet the parameters of the zoning ordinance as amended. And that would permit them to the use that's included in whatever is adopted by the council. What's recommended here is the mixed use with the various types of uses and all those bulk standards. So their only limitation, I shouldn't say only, but their limitation, as in any development, would be that they would have to work within the permitted uses of the ordinance and within the required bulk standards of whatever ordinance is adopted. And ultimately, that project would come back to the planning board, and the planning board would review it as they would any site plan application for, number one, does it meet the development ordinance? And you would review it for, as you normally would for under all the planning requirements having to do with traffic impact, open space, the affordable housing component, all of that would be considered, in any application that eventually worked its way back to the planning board. So, and it would be at that point, there would be a final decision making, but your control would be limited by whether or not the uses and the design is permitted by the ordinance. So you have to keep that in mind.
Yeah, because it's so different than anything I've done with over the years. Been on the planning board. I said that my always understanding was the master plan is sort of like it's sort of a thing that people want to do. I think it might be a good something in the next 10 years that we should think about. But there was nothing specific that that would go in any one particular way. Just a more different type of situation. But this is a little bit different because it's being put onto one particular owner, which is entirely different. I'm a person, I don't know what I'm going to say what we're going to do one way or the other, but I would think if we go for this master plan, that's fine, as long as there's no thing with Canal, which is still, if they want to do that, they can do it, but they'll have to really start from scratch. They want to come in it, but they're not. For example, we said they're going to have this this master plan was going to have this option that you can do, you're changing the ORs or ARs, whatever they are, but that should not be any worse, more than anything else that would be offered for other people. And it shouldn't be something that's it's a pot, it's something it's already done. And that's what I might be a little concerned about. I'm just sort of thinking about it. It was a little bit different than when I thought it was going to be discussed or how it was discussed. I think the master plan concept is fine, but I think you got to be careful that that what Connell is done is something that's very. There's no guarantee that they're going to have what they want under that particular situation. They might say, we want to do it, this is our obligation, but it should not be something that they can do to the point where if they don't have any variances, they're going to get it done. That's what I'm concerned about. I don't think it's a bad idea, but I don't want it to be in a situation that they're going to come in and they're going to get it because if they don't have any variances, which is unusual, but in this case, it could be, and they're going to say, fine, we're not going to have any variances now that we're able to do this. And I had no idea. That's why it was sort of caught me off of, I wasn't aware this was how it was going to come out.
Yeah, I mean, Kevin here. My opinion, I sentimentally, I understand the vision. I think this is very, very non-specific with respect to almost everything. They basically said they would like to rezone it. They'd like to have a range of undisclosed services, a wide array of services. I think increasing the commercial footprint by 150% or something like that, I think is notable. There's really nothing which really speaks definitively to impact on traffic at all. And they talk about this in the context of the master plan, of which this really relates to a commercial application of a property. This doesn't speak to the existing master plan or the new master plan, which has been postponed to some undetermined date. So it's hard for me to seriously want to vote in favor of this because there's not enough specific information to actually to vote in favor of. It's very, very murky.
Mike, I have a question or two, and I have a statement too. First of all, I mean, we've been dealing with Connell for years, and they have yet to do anything wrong to the township. I mean, they've been nothing but good to the township of Berkeley Heights since they started. They've been open with every application they've given us. They've given us everything we've asked for as a planning board, at least since I've been on the planning board. They've given us pretty much everything we've asked for. We're only changing the zone. I mean, if this thing gets voted on tonight to change the zoning there, is there a financial benefit to the township right now if this gets done now, especially during this pandemic? Isn't there something going on with that? I mean, we have to look at that as well. I mean, I'm just not sure. Keenan, maybe you can help me with that, or maybe Bill, you can help me with that as far as that goes. I mean, this thing's on the table to change the zoning. We don't have an application in front of us. Once we've seen an application, we can make changes to the application, just like we would to any other application. And as far as the traffic, I know I looked at that study earlier, the one that was, I guess, put out there, and I do know that the township along with the county is going to work on whether it's putting in option 1 or 2 or 1, 2, or 3. I didn't look at all of them in detail, but there absolutely is going to be something addressed as far as the traffic on Twin Falls specifically. And then to hear that there's going to be less traffic if this thing gets done is even more of a positive. I mean, this whole area, as everybody knows, Bonnie Burn Road, you're going to have 300 units getting put in. There is, I'm not sure, I don't care what you add or what you take away from this place. You can't get down to Route 22 without sitting in traffic at 5 o'clock at night. I don't care what you add or what you take away. That's just the nature of Berkeley Heights going down to Scotch Plains, period. That's just the way it is. On Diamond Hill Road, on Bonnie Burn Road, that's how it's been for years. I've been in town for 30 years. It's been that way for a long time. So I'm just kind of curious why we would not at least consider this tonight and look into that, to changing that zoning so we can get this thing moving forward and let one of our best customers in town, who's been nothing but good to Berkeley Heights at all since they've been in town, get moving on what they want to do. I'd like to hear maybe from Keenan or even from Michael, because I'm not really sure about some of those things I just mentioned.
Yeah, well, let me just respond on the fiscal side, because as I did mention, Connell did submit a summary of its fiscal impact analysis in support of its rezoning proposal some time back. It was presented to council, and they are projecting with this rezoning, it would be a pretty significant boost in terms of annual tax revenues. I mean, you know, just looking at the summary here, over $1 million a year to the school districts, $300,000 to $400,000 of additional tax revenue to the municipality. You know, obviously, fiscal considerations, that's not the primary reason for any rezoning in town, and that cannot be the basis for a master plan reexamination. But there certainly are benefits in terms of, you know, maintaining and enhancing this as a rateable in the township moving forward. There's definitely that aspect to the rezoning. But I want to remind the planning board about what its role is in this process and what a master plan reexamination report is, because at a certain point, you can only get in a certain level of detail at this stage. I mean, this is really a policy document. You're providing recommendations and direction to the governing body, whose role it is to actually prepare the detailed zoning ordinance. So I understand, Kevin, your comments about some of the vagueness in this reexamination report. Some of that's just the very nature of the document, in that we're trying to provide flexibility and directives for the council to consider. The council is actually, you know, potentially working with, you know, the property owner and getting into some of those details. That all takes place at the time of drafting of the actual ordinance. Also, I want to remind the planning board that the existing master plan, the 2017 master plan reexamination, essentially allows them to do much of this already. Again, aside from the recommended increase in the allowable retail development on the property, much of this can already be done. But what you lose is the open space opportunity that would be publicly accessible on the property. So, you know, the planning board has a specific sort of initial role in terms of getting the ball rolling from a land use policy standpoint. The council takes that up. This will come back to the planning board in the form of an ordinance. And if you don't like certain details, certain provisions in the ordinance, you will have the opportunity to comment on those, aside from just weighing in on whether or not it's consistent with the master plan. And then above and beyond that, when they come in for site plan review, then you can get into the details of traffic, circulation, you know, things of that nature. So there will be many bites at the apple, so to speak. And I just want to be clear in terms of the direction I'm giving the planning board as your planner in terms of how I see the master plan re-exam in the overall process.
Question for you. Why wouldn't this be, since we're speaking about a particular tax lot, why isn't this presented to the zoning board?
This is a property, it's large enough, it essentially represents most of the OR zone property in town. This is not a use variance application, in my opinion, that the zoning board could have jurisdiction over. I mean, that's ultimately a legal determination, but I'll just tell you from a planning standpoint, this property should be rezoned. It's not a property that should be reviewed or considered in a use variance context. We want the planning board and the council to have control over the future development of this property, rather than a piecemeal application here or there for a use variance from the zoning board, which the planning board has no opportunity to weigh in on, and there's no policy direction from the planning board. To me, that's what you want to avoid. What we're trying to do is do essentially the planning process as the municipal land use law lays it out, which is you really got to start with the master plan, lay the foundation, and then let the governing body go to work in terms of crafting the detailed ordinance that ultimately needs to be implemented to see some development on this property. And look, I mean, as Mr. Graziano pointed out, this is an owner that's been ready to develop for some time. They think there's a better way to do this than what's allowed under the existing zoning, hence all the time and efforts that's being spent on the rezoning process. And this is really the first step.
Can I add something in? Is that, I take a turn? So I know we're not going to talk about the traffic right at this for the rezoning piece, but you know, I just want to get on record that I think it'd be important that the developer bear the cost of whatever we're going to do at Twin Falls and Diamond Hill, or Twin Falls and Valley, whatever they decide to do, which end. But I do look at this as an opportunity for the residents of Berkeley Heights. I think it would enhance the livability. I think what some people aren't realizing is it's going to be developed. That's going to impact the traffic. We can deal with the traffic in another way when we get to that point. And I think we have an opportunity for a couple things. And I know, Keenan, you said you can't look at it all on tax revenue, but it can enhance the lives of residents. I feel for the residents of Twin Falls, and I understand their frustration with the traffic, but if we can solve that problem where you're not dealing with it as a cut-through street, I think that would enhance your area as well. And I think the opportunity to have these open spaces and entertainment venues, and Craig Johnson was saying that we've seen the survey, and what people want are these entertainment venues, and this is a space where you can put that in because it's a larger space than our downtown space. So there's some other things to think about.
Keenan, for instance, if we wanted to, if we were concerned with that 50,000 square foot or the total increase of 100,000 square foot of residential, or not residential, retail, excuse me, if we wanted to cut those in half, could that be our recommendation back to the town council?
You as the planning board can make whatever recommendations you'd like. I mean, you can suggest revisions to this document as presented. I'll tell you, some of these provisions are not coming out of thin air. They're things that have been based off of concept plans that have been presented to council. There are things that, have been discussed with the owner in terms of what's actually feasible on the property. But the planning board that's why we're here, to get your input.
Keenan, should we have access to that information to give us better insight as to what their vision is commercially for that property? Because you're asking us to make general policy position statements without specific information that's already been conveyed to the governing body.
Yeah, absolutely. All that information is available on the township website. So there's a summary that's posted under Connell Park. I think it's on the redevelopment page. It contains all the information that's been submitted, including some concept plans are available.
Ken, the question I have about this, it would seem to me that the master plan would say you have the opportunity, what it should do is allow this type of, you have the various, the ORs or ARs, and I just don't really know what they are. You're saying one of the things you think that it's in the master plan, which we think is a good idea, is that you're going to allow a different, allowing a larger amount of something in the master plan, just a concept. But I think if there's anything about what's going to happen on that concept, that should be something from the township. This is not something that the planning board does at the beginning. My idea is that the master plan gives you an idea. It's something that might be done, or maybe in the future it'll be done. But that's the concept of the master plan that I always thought about.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, that's why, if you look on page 3 in terms of our suggested recommendations to council, we actually don't cite that prohibition on retail above 50,000 square feet, because we recognize that that's something that, that's something for the council to consider. The planning board could add, I made you aware of the draft ordinance and the initial provision of 50,000 square feet. If you'd like to recommend or provide more definition to that, you could certainly do that.
Well, why should the planning board right now be involved with what you're recommending about what's going to be done? My idea about the master plan is that we're thinking because there's changing not only in Berkeley Heights, but around other areas, and that people want to have the ability to do certain things that hasn't been done in the past. So we think this is a good idea, but we're not getting and say we're only going to do it for 90,000 for a certain number of, it's to me, the master plan is a sort of a nebulous thing. It's almost like somebody what would like to do seeing in the next 10-year period. That's how I've always visioned it. Now, if somebody wants to come with there and say, this is what we want to do based upon what's in that, in the concept there, that's one thing. But here you seem to be taking it to you're getting the planning board, to me, getting into something we shouldn't be getting into.
Mike, I don't agree. I mean, we're not talking about the master plan here. We're talking about the one site and the potential rezoning of the site. And they're, I don't want to say being very specific, but they're providing guidelines for that. And, as Keenan described before, or Mr. Robinson described is, we can make a recommendation to the town council and then they will take our recommendation under consideration. So if we don't like the 50,000 square foot, we can come back with, hey, we're really concerned with that, go with half with that. But ultimately, it's a town council's decision.
Hey, just a point of reference, a football field is 57,000 square feet, so 50,000 is about the size of a football field.
It's big.
Forget about the 50,000 square feet because it's not even in this document, right? So that's something, if the council gives you an ordinance that has that prohibition, that would be the appropriate time to comment on that.
Okay, so
the document says is just generally there should be some limitations placed on retail within the zone.
Keenan,
Yes.
is there anything in the documents new previously, or can it even be, which would say if you build X square footage or X number of units of housing that you can then build a percentage of your commercial, and then when you build more of your housing you get to build more of your commercial, so that we can sort of be sure that both get built as opposed to all of one and not the other?
Well, they have to build the housing. I mean, that's part of the affordable housing settlement. So beyond that, because that's the extent of their housing proposal, to my knowledge,
So they have to do that first?
I have to check, but I believe, they have to build a residential. It's part of their developers agreement. It's part of the affordable housing settlement. So beyond that, we have not looked at sort of phasing or tying different uses to each other.
Okay, because it sounded like that was somewhat of the residents' concern, that they would end up with all this commercial space and perhaps not the residential, or that the commercial could end up being another office building or medical facility all at once as opposed to these other things. So if they had to do it percentage-wise, the chances of it becoming some sort of hospital type situation or all in one commercial entity would be less.
Okay, well, that's something I can certainly share that feedback with council. And we have Councilwoman Posh here as well as heard it firsthand.
Good point, Robin.
Bill?
Yes.
Bill?
Yes, Mr.
Okay,
Chairman.
so based, maybe I missed something. I'm just trying to get all these things in place. If right now the resolution is both part there's the master plan itself, and in that is a provision regarding what how these 12 acres are going to be handled.
There is an existing master plan that is in the process of being revised. What the board has in front of it is a reexamination report. The reexamination report is making certain recommendations with regard to the township's master plan. And it is specifically making a recommendation with regard to this, property, this particular property. And I would leave it to Keenan, but presumably that the basis of the recommendation is that it presents an opportunity for an improved use and zoning of the area. And the recommendation being that the designation be changed to mixed use with recommended certain limitations or restrictions on what's permitted in terms of use and bulk standards. And so that is what has been presented. And in terms of the action requested of the board is to consider that reexamination plan and determine whether or not you want to approve the reexamination plan with the recommendations. And if so, there would be a motion to adopt a resolution approving and adopting the reexamination report as is. If there were revisions or comments or suggested changes to it, certainly the board could do that as well, which would be included in any type of resolution. So those are really the options tonight.
Okay, what I might have gotten, made a mistake. This is two parts. There's a master plan, which is the master plan. But then the other part of it is what they wanted, what the Kano wants to do with respect to those 12 acres. Is that correct?
Well, there's a recommendation regarding the overall zoning, but that's not what, that only makes a recommendation and incorporates it into the master plan as this is what's recommended. This is the goal for this area of the township.
Okay.
What would happen then with that, if this was adopted, then it would be up to the township council to determine whether or not they draft and create development ordinances that would be consistent and implement the recommendations of the master plan. That would be a two-step part. As you were mentioning earlier, this is a concept. This is a desirable. The determination would be: is this what we want to see, and how we want to see it developed for this particular area? And then it's up to the township council to create implementing ordinances for consistent with the recommendations, which would then come back to the planning board for review and recommendation.
Okay, I think I understand what's going on. It's a little bit new, something unusual. I just didn't think of it that way. Okay.
Yeah, I think if the board is going to take action, it would either be to vote on the resolution to adopt the reexamination report as drafted. And in that event, there is a draft resolution that was prepared, essentially just adopting the reexamination report. But certainly if the council, this is an opportunity, if the council had other recommendations, additions, comments that should be included, that could be incorporated in a resolution as well.
Would it make sense to make a recommendation about the council looking at the additional increase in retail and, revisiting that? Both the overall increase and the $50,000 square foot, which I know Keenan had said was really just, a ballpark and not etched in writing at this time.
Well, and let me just be clear, because I think we need to be careful about, you have a document in front of you, which is what you're, potentially poised to adopt. If you have any recommendations, I would appreciate if you would actually focus on the text and say, look, I disagree with this sentence here. I would recommend it be revised accordingly. I'm here just as the township planner in a different capacity, listening to the comments that I'm hearing, separate and apart from what's actually in this document, which we can consider as we potentially move forward with an actual ordinance. But so, for example, in terms of the retail, look at the section on page 3, and if the board has any specific revisions to that section, which is is vague. It basically, it tells the council that it should set certain limits around retail, and it should be done on various types of retail. If you disagree with that policy direction, then we need to address that in the document. But if you agree, then I think it's fine to send to council.
Yeah, I mean, I have to admit, I don't have the document in front of me, and unfortunately, if we were in town hall right now, I would have a copy in front of me. So, unfortunately, we're somewhat at a disadvantage.
Well, I'll just read it to you. So for retail, it says a maximum square footage of retail and entertainment venue uses available to the public within the MU zone shall be provided. A portion of the overall retail cap should be reserved for entertainment-focused retail uses such as bowling alleys and movie theaters. In addition, existing and future retail spaces within the existing office and research and development buildings should be made available to the general public where appropriate. Finally, it is recommended that big box retail stores should be prohibited. And that's essentially it. So it's just some general policy directives for council in terms of crafting an ordinance.
Yeah, with that wording, I'm fine with that.
Okay.
I'm going to add that I did get a chance to read the document online, and I figured out how to look at it while you're Zooming. So that's a new talent of mine. So I have no problem with it as well.
Keenan, should we be, since there's no specific definition of big box store, is it worthwhile adding in parentheses? Is there a common definition, or if there's no specific definition of big box store, where would you go for the definition of big box store? Webster's?
Well, yeah, right. So I think the language is, it is recommended that big box retail stores should be prohibited. So I think implicit in that is that whatever ordinance comes from this should have to address how you prohibit big box stores, which presumably might include defining what that means. So I think,
okay.
I have a problem having a guidance document where you're prohibiting something which is undefined. It doesn't make any logical sense to me.
But we're not actually prohibiting it, Kevin. It has to get to the board. The board has to do their job.
It's just a recommendation.
You're not changing this document that's in front of us. You're not changing the document.
But we're asking to approve a document where it says we're prohibiting something which is undefined.
Yeah, but all it says is big box stores, and that's up to the council to make that decision at that point.
How can we support prohibiting something which is undefined?
Yeah, but that's not the idea of this plan, though. That's not the idea of this plan. That's the idea of when it gets to council, then when it gets back to us to start making those minor decisions, or to change the change the 50,000 square foot thing when it comes back to us, or when that goes to the board for their ordinance. That's what they could change. It's just that's not our job as a planning board right now at all to do. And you're going to nitpick every single sentence in this thing, and you're not going to get anything done.
To some extent, Joe is right in that this is just a guidance document, which then has to be turned into an ordinance governing development for the site.
Correct.
This is just I know there's a word that I'm trying to think of that I can't, but like a guideline document.
Yeah, I just read the resolution, and as Keenan said, it's not specific, and I think for the most part it is in agreement with what everything we want for the site from a big picture standpoint, and just to move it on to the next stage.
All right.
When you were on the township committee or the council, whichever it was called at the time, did you not get involved with the old master plan previously, where it's a guidance document, a theory almost, and then the specific ordinances have to be written from that, or using that as a guideline?
Correct. I mean, the master plan is in fact a strategic document. I mean, so by design, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that's what I'm thinking.
Okay, just so we're on the same page. You know, if we're going to vote on this thing, we have to understand what we're voting on.
All right, are we ready to vote?
I just want to add, there is a definition for big box store if anyone's interested. An official, it's, you know, a large retail store whose physical layout resembles a large square or box when seen from above. Big box store is characterized by a large amount of floor space, more than 50,000 square feet, a wide array of items available for sale, and location in suburban areas.
Is that part of our zoning ordinance?
No, it's the business dictionary definition of the big box store. It's obviously something we could adopt as well. Just a little fun fact there.
Mr. Chairman, the resolution before the board would be that the April 2020 Master Plan Reexamination Report prepared by the Phillips Price firm, including the recommendation to rezone the portion of the Connell corporate property known as Block 4102, Lot 1, Block 4301, Lots 1.011, 1.012, and 1.0, and Block 4501, Lots 25 and 26, to a mixed-use MU zone, along with the recommended bulk and parking standards be adopted and approved by the planning board. That would be, if the board is considering the motion, that would be the motion to be made.
Mr. Robertson, if I wanted to include, or if I was going to ask you to include something in this that would also have to do with providing an update to the town's tax map for these block and lots, would we be able to do that here?
Keenan, is that something that could be incorporated into a revised reexamination report? Updating the tax?
I mean, it could, but honestly, if there's you could just tell me what the recommendation is and we can just, you know, make sure it gets done.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
If you
That
see
portion of the tax map needs to be updated.
Yeah, if you see an issue with the tax maps, well, are you saying there's an inaccurate map in the reexamination report?
No, I'm saying that our tax maps don't reflect all the recent changes to their block and lots.
Okay.
And that it needs to be updated.
Understood.
And Robin, am I right that when a tax map needs to get changed, that the developer is responsible for the cost of paying for the new maps?
Well, we have a tax map fee, maintenance fee or something, but we do actually need to get this particular page updated so that all these lots show, you know, 1.011 and 1.012 don't appear on our tax map. And they should.
Not to be a stickler, on page 3, just looking at that A through L list of uses, recommended uses. I mean, this runs the gamut from schools to churches, to municipal buildings to, I mean, it really, that's the broadest definition of what to be done on that property. Are we comfortable with that? I mean, that's a material departure from what's currently available.
Well, I did comment in the beginning about clarifying the educational piece. I think that's important, what that looks like, what that means. And Keenan said that we could do that.
Well, I think
You
that
could do
we're
that
not
you could
used
do that at the
to.
council level.
Right, on
Correct.
council, right.
Well, the whole point of why it is the full gamut, though, is the live, work, play scheme is to have pretty much everything available on the one property. I mean, I don't think the likelihood of anybody building a church there, but I guess if they wanted to.
I mean, this really takes rezoning to a whole new level.
Let's be clear, these are uses that are currently permitted on the property. So these uses, for the most part, are permitted either in the ORA1 or ORA-B or ORA. I would say the one that jumps out to me is dog parks, parks, and playgrounds, because actually under the existing zoning, the open space is municipally owned open space, which implies that, you know, the notion of publicly accessible but privately owned open space and recreational amenities actually aren't permitted under the existing zoning. That's one that we're proposing to change. But for the most part, these others are permitted on the property.
So really, this rezoning is a big benefit from what you just said.
Right.
Public spaces.
Are we at the point where I can make a motion to adopt it as it was read?
I'm supportive of that.
Okay. So I make a motion to adopt it as Mr. Robinson read it.
Second.
Second by Larry.
Do you want a roll call? Mr. Einbinder,
Yes.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Graziano,
Yes.
Mr. Nishefero,
Yes, I'll go along with it.
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Ms. Pogue,
Yes.
Ms. Greenwald,
Yes.
Mr. Cunningham.
Yes.
8-0.
Okay, the next part, you ready for that, Bill?
Yes, yes. The second matter, or the next matter on the agenda is the presentation of the preliminary investigation that Mr. Hughes's firm has prepared with regard to the property known as Block 502, Lot 3 on the tax map. And the report recommends that that specific lot and block be designated as an area in need of redevelopment, and actually added to some other property that was recently included in the area in need of redevelopment designation. And so Mr. Hughes would present that report to the board this evening. And if the board is in agreement with his recommendation, there would be a resolution making a recommendation to the council to designate this particular property as an area in need of redevelopment. So unless there are questions of and it would follow the same procedure, the board may ask Mr. Hughes any questions, and members of the public would be permitted to question Mr. Hughes, and the board would vote on the proposed resolution. Okay. And Mr. Hughes is here, and same procedure. I think he should be sworn in and can testify with regard to the preliminary investigation report that what has been prepared.
Want me to swear him in for this?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Hughes, do you have any, would you swear that your statements before the planning board will be truthful?
Yes, I do. Okay, so I'm going to present the redevelopment study. The official name is Area in Need of Redevelopment Study for Block 502, Lot 3, as addition to Berkeley Crossing redevelopment area. So I know the board is familiar with this overall property, at least the existing Berkeley Crossing redevelopment area You'll recall there was actually a site plan application pursuant to the existing redevelopment plan, which this board approved last year. So this is the former Berkeley Florist site. Since that site plan approval was granted by the planning board, a couple of things have happened. So the redeveloper has basically determined that the project as originally approved was not economically viable. They have also acquired lot 3 within block 502, which is adjacent to the existing parcels. And they have—
By the way, what are the areas that you're talking about?
So this is, it's along Springfield Avenue. Block 502 is bounded by Passaic Street, Passaic Avenue, River Street. It's the former Berkeley Florist site, sort of the western edge of Springfield Avenue. It was, the project itself was approved by the planning board probably last summer. It was a mixed-use project.
It's like across from Doorboy.
Yes.
Oh, across the street from Doorboy?
Doorboy
Okay.
and Walls, kind of.
Yeah, just down the street from Halls on the other side.
Right. And so to be clear, what we're addressing here is the potential addition of one additional tax lot to the additional redevelopment area that would allow a new project on this site to potentially proceed. But the first step here is to consider the redevelopment study. Does this particular lot meet the redevelopment criteria? So block 502 lot 3 is roughly 0.3 acres. It has frontage along Passaic Avenue and then also along the paper street of Washington Street. It is currently improved with a single-story, single-family residence, which is vacant. It has a driveway, a paved walkway leading from the parking area to the front entrance of the house. It's a typical suburban single-family home property. It is now under the ownership of Elite Properties at Berkeley Heights, which is affiliated with the designated redeveloper for the Berkeley Crossing redevelopment area. In the report, there's several figures which show its general location, its aerial context, and several photographs of the existing site. The lot, as you just heard, is part of the existing or adjacent to the existing redevelopment area located along Springfield Avenue. This property was formerly utilized by Berkeley Florist, a florist and garden center operation, while lot 4 was actually formerly improved with several residential and commercial structures, which have since been cleared. Block 502 is surrounded by single-family homes to the north and commercial uses to the east along Springfield Avenue. This is across Passaic Avenue from the former Aquatic Center and the tennis club. Across Springfield Avenue are several medical offices and a funeral home. And this is just east of the Riverview Banquet Center along Springfield Avenue. It is currently zoned HB3, which permits a range of commercial uses and also single-family homes and townhouses. The existing master plan essentially notes the desire to maintain the existing suburban character of the township, improve the economic vitality of the downtown, and provide a full range of housing choices through redevelopment. The 2017 reexamination report largely reiterated those goals, while also updating recommendations regarding housing in response to the township's affordable housing settlement. And as you're aware, the existing Berkeley Crossing redevelopment area is part of the township's affordable housing settlement. It's part of its plan. It does have an inclusionary housing component. So any consideration of this lot being added to that existing area would also be a part of furthering those inclusionary housing objectives. And also this property is located in the planning area 1 of the state development and redevelopment plan, which strongly encourages redevelopment, particularly of compact and mixed use nature, which this is consistent with due to its location basically within the downtown area. So turning our attention to the redevelopment criteria as set forth in the local redevelopment and housing law, you're probably familiar with these criteria by this point. I know the Planning Board has entertained a number of redevelopment investigations over the last several years. This one may be a little bit different in that we're utilizing what's known as Section 3 of the local redevelopment and housing law. And this is summarized on page 12 of my report, but I'll just read it into the record. It states, it should be emphasized that individual properties that do not meet any of the statutory conditions may still be included within an area in need of redevelopment, provided that within the study area as a whole, one or more of the express conditions are prevalent. This provision is referred to as Section 3 and is set forth under 40:12A-3 of the redevelopment statute. And this is basically under the definition of redevelopment area. And it states a redevelopment area may include lands, buildings, or improvements which of themselves are not detrimental to the public health, safety, or welfare, but the inclusion of which is found necessary with or without change in their condition for the effective redevelopment of the area of which they are part. So basically the redevelopment statute recognizes there may be situations where individual properties, if excluded from a redevelopment area, would act as an impediment to redevelopment or would otherwise adversely impact a redevelopment scheme for adjoining lands that are in need of redevelopment. In some cases, properties that alone don't meet the criteria still make sense or logical additions to existing redevelopment areas that meet the criteria because they can effectuate a redevelopment project in the area. So that's really the focus of this study. The existing redevelopment area, lots 1, 2, 4, and 5 within Block 502, were determined by the Planning Board to meet criteria B, C, H, and also Section 3, as Section 3 was utilized for to designate the existing Lot 1 in the study area. What our study recommends is, or finds and determines, is that Section 3 should also be utilized in consideration of Lot 3. Now, the existing redevelopment area firmly established a statutory basis for the designation and emphasized the importance of the entirety of Block 502 in terms of furthering the township's objectives for downtown revitalization and inclusionary housing development. So like Lot 1, this study area Lot 3 is also necessary to include for the effective redevelopment of the area. As noted previously, the study area and the existing Berkeley Crossing redevelopment area are located near the western gateway to downtown Berkeley Heights. Further, the Springfield Avenue corridor south of Washington Street is envisioned by both the master plan and the municipal land use procedures ordinance as critical commercial and mixed use areas vital to downtown revitalization. The existing redevelopment area is an irregular Z-shaped tract with partial frontages along Passaic Avenue and Washington Street, which is unconducive to establishing an efficient building with sufficient on-site enclosed parking. The designation of Lot 3 is necessary to effectuate a high-quality gateway project and an attractive streetscape along Springfield Avenue and Passaic Avenue. Further, by facilitating such a mixed-use infill project, the study area can provide an appropriate transition between the low-density residential neighborhoods to the north of Washington Street and the commercial uses aligning Springfield Avenue. As such, while the study area itself is not detrimental to the public health, safety, or welfare, its inclusion in the Berkeley Crossing redevelopment area is necessary to effectuate redevelopment activities and township revitalization goals for the overall area. And I would add that certainly criterion H can also be applied to this property. Criterion H references the promotion of smart growth planning and policy within the state. And to the extent this lot is included in PA1 under the state plan, it's also a designated state smart growth area. So certainly the designation of Lot 3 would be consistent with smart growth planning principles because it will help facilitate a project that is compact and mixed use in nature that will promote walkability and downtown revitalization. So in summary, the inclusion of Lot 3 is necessary to facilitate the redevelopment of the Berkeley Crossing redevelopment area to achieve the township goals of revitalizing the downtown and expanding inclusionary housing. A successful redevelopment will also advance compact mixed-use infill development in a designated smart growth area. Therefore, the study area qualifies as an area in need of redevelopment pursuant to Section 3 and Criterion H of the Local Redevelopment State Housing Law. And just in conclusion, obviously, this is the redevelopment study. If the board looks favorably upon this, our conclusions, it would recommend to council the inclusion of this lot in the existing redevelopment area. That would set the stage for a potential amendment to the existing redevelopment plan that would include this lot and would actually envision a new and different project than what you saw last year for this particular area. So with that, that concludes my direct testimony.
Would they have to apply for a new redevelopment? Because I think that redevelopment plan was approved was a project specific approval, correct?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
So basically, you
So
know,
they would have to basically start, they would have to reapply for a new, a whole new redevelopment plan would have to be presented and adopted, correct?
correct. I mean, they're back to, it's a new redevelopment plan and new redevelopment agreement because it's a new project.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm actually happy that they were able to purchase this other piece of property, because otherwise I think it would have been very hard for whoever lived there
Mm-hmm.
to be surrounded by the project. And it gives them an opportunity to square out the development, although I'll be interested to see what they want to do with the paper street from Washington Avenue. Washington Street, whatever.
Does any other member of the planning board have any questions or comments regarding this?
No. I, for one, am okay with it.
It's pretty clear that it'll make the building better looking from Springfield Avenue. And it just, again, like what Robin said, I can't imagine wanting to live in a home surrounded by that other mixed use building.
Makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
Are there any comments from people other than the planning board? Okay, Bill, don't you have a resolution for this?
There was a proposed draft resolution that was circulated. It's lengthy, but the motion that could be proposed would be that the study area that was testified to by Mr. Hughes be recommended to be an area in need of non-condemnation redevelopment to be added to the Berkeley Crossing redevelopment area, which is block 502, lots 1, 2, 4, and 5, based upon the criteria, which is NJSA 40A :12A-5, and also 12-3, which were the criteria that Mr. Hughes testified to as supporting the finding. So that would be the motion that you would be making, the recommendation that the council designate this area as an area in need of non-condemnation redevelopment.
And we can, it's going to be handled right tonight, correct? No, nothing else has to be done.
That would be the motion, that would be the resolution. A more complete written resolution was circulated and will be adopted. The resolution, other than that result incorporates a lot of the technical information that Mr. Hughes included in his report. But essentially, that's what it does. It makes the recommendation to the council to designate this lot as an area in need of non-condemnation redevelopment.
So I move that the resolution just read to us by Mr. Robertson be adopted.
Second.
Second.
Please call the roll for this.
Mr. Einbinder,
Yes.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Graziano,
Yes.
Mr. Nishepro,
Yes.
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Ms. Pogue,
Yes.
Ms. Greenwald,
Yes.
Mr. Cunningham,
Yes.
8-0.
I thank everybody for coming, and it's a little bit longer than we expected, but we're done. And that's why I can imagine we're doing it a little bit again, but hopefully not too many more times. It's kind of difficult to do it. Let's wait. Everybody have a good weekend, and
Motion to.
Wait, don't we need a motion to adjourn?
well, you didn't give me a chance to, okay?
Okay. I thought you were telling us all goodbye.
Is that? No.
He was leading up to it.
I move that I just want to make sure we're taken care of. Just want to talk for a minute or two. I move that we adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Have a good weekend, people.
Be well. Stay safe.
I
Everybody.
can't wait to have an application with plans. That'll be tough.
Yeah. My space is not big enough.
Bye, Robin.
Goodbye, Joe.
Bye.